directeur général de Popcorn Training au Nord pour Africa. Et dans les 30 ou 40 minutes prochaines, j'aimerais parler du problème de cybercriminalité dans les contextes africains et en particulier de facteurs humains. Je vais partager les résultats de l'enquête que nous avons menée dans 8 pays africains. Et je vais aussi partager des conseils sur la manière de changer efficacement les cultures de sécurité. Comme vous pouvez écouter, ça fait 20 ans que je fais des études en français, alors si ça ne vous dérange pas trop, je vais continuer en anglais. Okay, quickly, Novo4 is our head office. They're an American company and they specialize in cybersecurity awareness. That's all they do. They don't sell technology. The only thing we do is we raise people's awareness in the cyber crime and cybersecurity space. And Popcorn Training, which is the company I founded about 6-7 years ago, we're from Cape Town, and we used to be it's very small, but we used to be a competitor of Novo4. We produce content that makes people aware, and we do it in a way that is fun and engaging. Like we believe, if you work in IT, you might be very interested and excited about cybersecurity. If you are like my husband, he works in wine, you're not so much interested. So we produce content that talks to people that are not IT specific and brings like the importance of security across in like a more fun and engaging manner. And since 2018 we've been part of the Novo4 group, so we now represent Novo4 in Africa. But we will continue to create content that is relevant to the African audience. And in fact, like today I went to the IDC conference. They had a security roadshow, and one of the ways of creating content is we use local stand-up comedians, and I'd like to get in touch with the Mauritian Stand-up Comedy Association to find people that normal people on the street can relate to and have them tell the stories in a fun way, because people just remember more if it's done with a little bit of sense of humor. Anyway, so Africa, I mean, we connected. There's 500 million people that are already online. But what is so interesting about Africa is that in the next 3 years alone, we will double that number. And they were talking about 1 billion people that are mostly using their mobile phones connected to the internet, and a lot of them are first-time users. A lot of them are not native English speakers, so the level of awareness is very, very low. Interestingly enough, like part of the survey that we conducted, we also asked, what kind of how do people connect, and more than 90% connect on WhatsApp. In Kenya, it's 99%. And I know that when I speak to Kenyan, like partners or customers, they often don't answer their emails, but they will answer their WhatsApp, right? And that really, it's just testament on to the mobile expansion. Africans are I think there it goes. 10% of our GDP is done on mobile transactions. That's the highest rate. There's no other. I think Asia has 2%. So we really are the sort of, the evangelist of mobility, that is awesome. But obviously with that comes a lot of risk too. So some of the statistics say that by 2025 we'll have 90% of all connections will be done using a mobile phone. And as amazing as that is, it makes us a low-hanging fruit in the eyes of the criminals. So cyber criminals they target emerging economies specifically, and Africa, and I'm going to talk about that now. So why do cyber criminals love Africa? So I spoke about the high degree of the digitalization and the use of mobility specifically in relation to payments, and at the same time, even though Mauritius is an exception to that because your government has been very proactive in putting regulated frameworks in place to sort of not only provide the legal framework to sort of prosecute criminals and fight cybercrime. You also have the enforcement in place. You have the law, and then you have the units that will help enforce it. Where South Africa, you may have the law, but you don't have the enforcement. So Mauritius is it's really the #1 country in the continent when it comes to being proactive cybersecurity, that's good news. The bad news is that most of your neighbors are not. There's only like a handful of countries in the whole continent that have a legal framework in place. And that means that the cyber criminals can just do whatever they want and they won't be prosecuted. There's a high unemployment rate of the youth, meaning that it's easier for them to be, incentivized to do illegal things. Also, a lot of governments have bigger issues to deal with. They have poverty, they have violent crimes, they may have wars that they need to get over. So a lot of the governments in the other countries see cybersecurity as like a luxury. It's not really a necessity, not realizing how big of an issue it actually is. And then the other thing, actually today I met somebody who said that in Madagascar, including the financial services companies, they use pirated software. That's another problem. If you use pirated software, it means you can't get your updates, your security patches. And the bad guys use those machines to launch further attacks on other machines. So they use it for bot networks, etc. The other thing is, typically, especially in the media, we love to portray the cyber criminal with like a hoodie, or we have this picture of this like nerd in the dark, but that's not at all how they are. They actually look, maybe not as good looking, but they look more like people in suits. They're really organized. They're very social. They collaborate with each other. They're like a whole industry on its own. So if you can imagine in the dark web, I can buy hacking for rent services. I get SLAs. If I buy a piece of malicious software and my victim's antivirus will pick it up, I get my money back. So they have like proper service levels in place with 24/7 support, chat rooms. So it's run like a proper industry, just selling illegal goods and services. And when we talk about the actual cost to Africa, there's only like a published report from 2017. That's probably much worse, 2 years later. But even then, we lost $3.5 billion to cybercrime. Now, if you think about that, money could be used for good, education, fighting poverty. And also quite interesting, Nigeria is the country that's been the worst hit by cybercrime, and they're also the country that actually exports the most cybercrime itself, even though they're also working hard on their own legal frameworks to sort of fight that. When we talk about the targets, who are these guys attacking? It's mainly like more than a quarter. It's the finance, like banking, insurance, financial services industry. Also governments, and then obviously your mobile, telcos, etc. In terms of what we can see, like the top threats, what's actually happening in numbers. So this is globally, it's not just Africa. So this year we saw a hell of a lot of cryptojacking, and that is bad guys sort of abusing unpatched services or open servers to run their crypto mining, to do their processing on these, unsecure servers. So basically abusing our processing power to do their mining. Ransomware, this is, are you familiar with ransomware, or should I explain this quickly? So if you get a piece of, basically it's like malicious software or virus that will encrypt everything until you pay Bitcoin or some sort of money to get your data back. So that's really popular. Data breaches, and then something called business email compromise. And that is, we see like much more sort of focus on that and increase in sophistication. That is when people, for example, impersonate your CEO, and then they send you an email, hey, I need you to do this payment for me. So that's called business email compromise, which is just plain fraud, by trying to spoof or to impersonate internal people. Just to give you an example, when we talk about ransomware, there's obviously the malware that I just shared with you, but there's also extortion attacks. So what happened at the city of Joburg in October, these guys got in and then they said, if you don't pay us the money, then we'll release all this data that we found about your citizen on the internet. And the city was literally down for a week because they sort of shut everything off to try and clean up apparently they didn't pay, and they just cleaned up the environment. But the reputational issue with that, also the impact on it, like people couldn't buy electricity online, they couldn't use the website. So it has a real impact, and we see more and more, because the governments, apart from Mauritius, but like generally these critical infrastructure guys are much more interesting targets, because the bad guys know, this will impact a lot of people, so they may be more likely to pay. It's something that's an interesting report. Verizon, they released like an annual report on sort of the sources or the reasons for data breaches. And they again this year confirmed that phishing, so that's sending like scams via email, is the #1 threat associated to any breaches. And then the next one that comes in line is credentials theft, so if I steal your username and password, or malware. And both of those are usually also accomplished through phishing. So phishing is really the #1 reason why people lose data or have data breaches or are being hacked. Yet it's a human problem. It's not a technology problem per se, right? And that's really, the bad guys know that. So why should I break through sophisticated, fancy security technology if all it takes is, I send somebody clever email and get them to click on it and sort of fall for it. And unfortunately, what we expect for next year, and it's actually not just next year, it's already happening, is the sophistication of those phishing attacks is just increasingly getting worse and worse. So to give you an example, what the bad guys are doing is they're using AI technology, machine learning, to do something called laser phishing. So what that is the bot or the machine will find everything about you that it can. Like it will look you up on social media, it will see what I can find about you in articles you may have written before, and then it will create a custom, and all automated, right? There's not even a person behind it. It will create a custom fish for you that will use the information that it found to try and get you to fall for the scam. The other thing that they make use of is the deep fakes technology. So are you familiar with deep fakes? Yeah. So that's already we've seen in a while. So what they do is they would take the recording of the CEO or an executive's voice, and then you just need like a few seconds, and then you can recreate the same voice and make it say anything. So they leave a message on your phone that says, "Hey, I just sent you this email. I need you to do this payment now, quickly." And then there'll be more extortion schemes like we've seen with the city of Joburg and kind of ransomware things. And that's really, if you think about it from an African perspective, it's a ticking time bomb, because on the one hand, we have all these people coming online, some of them first-time internet users. They're keen to transact via their mobile phones, and then on the other hand, we have this sort of focus at Africa, a sophistication increase in the attacks, and a focus on malware, mobile malware. So it's really is an issue. And then the report or the survey that we did really confirms that. So we surveyed just over 800 people across 8 African countries, including Mauritius, and then asked them a couple of questions, and what came back was that 30% have fallen for phishing email before. And by the way, all of these people, they are employed people, so they're not students, they work for organizations such as banks or even SME but they're all employed. That was sort of the condition. 27% fell for a scam before, were conned by a con artist, some of them actually twice. More than 50% had a malware infection before, and the majority of them are very concerned. So those are the end users, they're concerned about cybercrime. And 30% of them admit that they don't know much, don't know enough about it to protect themselves. But then there's the problem of, call it the unconscious incompetence. So, I used the example this morning. I consciously know that I'm incompetent in cricket, for example. I don't know anything about cricket. My husband explains it to me 1,000,000 times, and he plays quickly, and I still go and watch it, I still don't get it, right? So I'm consciously incompetent. I know I don't get it. But then there's a lot of stuff that I don't even know I don't know. And that's the unconscious incompetence. And that's the problem we have here with the African users, is that the ones that we surveyed is, you know, they said, well, how confident are you that you would recognize a security event or like an incident? And more than half of them said, yeah, I think I'm pretty confident I would, you know, notice that. And 60% of them think that they've been adequately trained. But in the same breath, more than 60% didn't know what ransomware was. They didn't know what multi-factor authentication is. So you see the problem, that there's a lot of them that have been affected before. At the same token, they think they know enough, but then if you ask them, they don't. So it's that unconscious incompetence that poses a real problem, because the people don't even know that they don't know. And then also the report also shows that a whole bunch of other risky behavior that people do, like for example, you know, oops. When you ask them, okay, how do you spot like a phishing email, for example? So they said, well, I only trust emails from people I know. But when you use spoofing or impersonation attacks, you will get emails from people you know, more and more so. So you can't trust that. Like even if it looks like someone you know, and it, you know, if you do spoofing properly, you won't see the difference. It's exactly the same email address. You need to like question everything that comes in if it's not expected, even from people you know, even from the CEO. If it sounds slightly like off or weird, rather verify. So this just shows that there's a real need for cybersecurity education and awareness. And you know, it really is like social engineering or hacking the human is sort of the biggest threat, and it's the biggest reason why it's linked to breaches. But yet the organizations often totally neglect it. They say, well, security is an IT issue, it's not a people issue. Okay, so this was all like, you know, the background, but there are good news, you know, like I don't like to just share bad news and things, and what are the good news? First of all, it's actually really easy to raise awareness, and I'm going to share some best practices. I think Mauritius is a good example in terms of your legal framework, etc. That's good news. And then the other thing that I want to share with you is how the industry is already working together, and how if we maybe raise more positive awareness around that and get those companies to work together and collaborate, we can together, you know, do so much more and like solve the problem. So, like I mentioned in the beginning, KnowBe4, you know, they're an American-based company, but they obviously interact internationally. They have more than 30,000 customers, and they have, you know, together it's about 9 million users. So what they did is they looked at all their customers, and they said, well, when we first go in, it says a customer that has never done an awareness program before. What we do is we create a baseline fish test. So we go in and we send out fake fishes to test if people fall for it. And the average hit rate, and it doesn't matter whether it's a bank or whatever, you know, it's 30%, which is pretty horrible actually to think about, but it really, so it's 30%. But then once you do awareness properly, and you sort of, you know, you tell the people, and you combine it with sort of simulation techniques, you can, within 3 months, you can raise that down to 15%. And over 12 months, to less than 5%, 2% average. Now that's a real, it's a fact-based risk reduction. That's a low-cost, effective way of addressing the people problem. And then, you know, I said, well, but that requires doing awareness properly. And if you talk about awareness, we obviously talk about cultures, and I'll just share like a few of the learnings that we've sort of conducted over the last few years. So if we want to change cultures, you know, we really have to fit into the overall culture. So if I'm at the TV station NBC, for example, or the NBC Bank or whatever, I need to fit into the way they communicate internally. I need to use their branding, their language, etc., their posters. So it's very important that it's, again, not just run out of IT, it's like a communications program, and it needs to take into account that there's different audiences. So I may also have a different message to the call center than I have to the executives. So that's really important. The other one is that people are not interested in company policies. It's just, they're not interested. As soon as I make a message personally relevant, people do care very much about their families. If I can teach a mom how to set up parental controls on the kids' devices, they pay attention, right? And that's very important because it actually helps us across two sectors. Like we're addressing the problem in the organizations and they address the risk of data breaches, but we're also helping the people at home because hopefully they will share it with their families and protect themselves at home. The other thing that is really important is to use engaging short content. We all like YouTube generation now. We can't listen to an hour talk. Or like a compliance training module. So we really try and make it by using stories, making them using a sense of humor, or sort of maybe visually appealing to get people to pay attention. And then the other really powerful tool is to use phishing simulations, those mock phishing exercises. It really trains people because especially the IT guys and the security guys, they always think, no, I will never fall for this, right? But when they do fall, you feel it in your whole body, that embarrassment, and then you will pay more attention next time. Although some people, they continuously click. It's just actually, it's also a really interesting study, by the way. I don't have slides on it, but our personality traits are linked to how we interact online, and they are 10% of the population. They always fall for stuff, and it's not the education, it's not the age, it's the personality trait. So if you're highly neurotic and if you're low on conscientiousness, you're more likely to fall for scams in real life and online. And we see it. There's some people that they call them suckers. They put the criminals on the sucker list, and then they target those guys even more. Okay, so this is just, in summary, like when companies want to run these programs to work with the marketing people, to be aware of different cultures, making it personally relevant, using short content, gamification with phishing simulation. And the other, I think, most important thing is to have fun and like sort of think of it like flossing. It's not, oh, I do this once a year and then I'm good. It has to be done more frequently. So the other good news that I just thought, I put in there is Mauritius as an example. So in terms of commitment to cybersecurity, Mauritius is rated number 1 in Africa, number 6 globally. That's actually a really cool thing, for such a small population. And why is that? Obviously, your government has a lot to do with it. It sees ICT as like a key component of your economy, and the alignment with the GDPR, which is like the European Data Protection Law, it's also a marketing angle because it allows you, or like an economy angle because it allows you to trade with European companies. But it really helps to make companies be more secure or protect their clients. And then thirdly, like the other good news I wanted to share is, this is one example of a bank that we've been dealing with for a couple of years, and they've done a lot of awareness internally. And what happened through the program is people became more interested in cybersecurity, even accountants and non-IT people. And then 8 months ago, they launched an internal academy, because one problem we have in Africa specifically is we don't have enough security professionals. There's a massive skill shortage. So what they said is they sort of launched this internal academy, and they had 4,000 applicants, like 4,000 people that applied to learn more and become cross-skilled in cybersecurity. That's a positive story, right? Okay, then I just have a little mini video that I wanted to use to break it up and to show you like how sometimes we sort of use that more humorous content to make people aware.
Morning, sir. Morning. 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 Oh, morning. Yay, life. What? I got an email from Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson.
Nothing you really important and really talented.
Okay, alright. I'm just attention, ma'am. That's me. Yeah. Okay, I urgently $50,000 into the following account. I'm about to board a plane. Kind regards, Mr. Thompson, CEO.
Oh gosh, he knows you. He knows you better.
Okay, this is what I'm gonna do. Okay, I'm gonna make this payment because this is very important, and he's about to board a plane, and then he's going to know that I'm a very trustworthy employee.
Good.
Joanne, what are you doing?
Who's that?
I'm the voiceover for this corporate video. Why are you making that payment?
Because Mr. Thompson sent an email to me because he chose me.
CEO, hello.
Let's guess. You have to do it immediately because he has to catch a flight.
Yeah? Did you also get one of these emails?
No, Joanne. Someone is attempting to scam the company.
What if it really is exactly effective?
Yeah, and
Just so important.
he needs me.
Joanne, don't make me come down there.
Where is he? Please,
I have no idea who the client is.
You're a junior accountant. Why would he possibly ask you and not your manager?
Well, first of all, Brenda.
Yeah.
And second of all, I'm a very important and trustworthy employee. Yeah.
Employee of the month.
Yes.
Be aware of CEO and other impersonation scams. By spoofing messages, fraudsters make emails look like they come from someone you know. Don't trust anything you haven't expected or that seems slightly out of the ordinary. Stop, think, and verify the sender before taking action.
Joanne,
Look, if we're in the corporate video, I'm supposed to be in these things, just don't make that payment.
Okay, so this was just bonjour. This was just an example of, using other, South African stand-up comedians that we use to, get people's buy-in and kind of paying attention. So the idea is to raise security awareness amongst non-IT people by using story-based techniques and, a little bit of humor and lightheartedness. And this was just an example. I'm actually pretty much done with the introduction presentation, but in summary what I spoke about is sorry for the repetition, but it's really about Africa being targeted by cybercrime, predominantly because we offer a safe haven for criminals. Apart from Mauritius and about maybe 5-6 other countries, we don't really have legal frameworks in place, so they can operate without any consequences. Also, the fact that within the next 3 years you'll have another 500 million people coming online, most of which will be first-time internet users. A lot of them are not English native speaking, and a lot of the security stuff out there is actually just available in English. And the fact that you have that, and then on the other side is that the mobility used specifically for payments and mobile banking is just going up. So that's amazing, but at the same time the bad guys target mobile devices and they know they can operate freely in Africa, there's no consequences, and you have these masses of people that come online and they're not aware at all of what they're actually being faced with. So we were just speaking about the importance of raising the awareness amongst people all across the continent. And then I shared some best practices of how to do that. So this is just maybe in the wrap up, it's really sort of the top tips for businesses. Because that's I often get asked, okay, what should I actually do? There's so much security, I have one guy who might be responsible for IT and security, and it's just, you can't keep up with the threats, you can't keep up with the vendors. There's today I learned there's 1,500 security technology vendors. Now, how do you even choose which tools to buy, etc.? So I think the number one tip is, again, going back to basics and asking the right questions. So doing a risk assessment, which is really just asking, what would the impact be to us as an organization if we had a breach? What type of data would people be interested in? What would happen if we were taken hostage or at ransom? And sort of ask those questions, discuss that with the board or the executives, and then make decisions on prioritizing how to invest in controls. And then the second one is just focusing on the basics. And take it back to those stats we shared in the beginning. If the majority of breaches are related back to human error, falling for phishing, sharing information. You should focus on the humans, right? And then patch management is another problem. Like, there's so many like malware attacks or other attacks that are maybe not human related, but because there's an unpatched server, a cloud service that hasn't been configured properly. So, if we go back to basics and say, well, let's do, and I know in very big organizations, patch management is a massive issue. It's not an easy thing to fix, but that's sort of, I would focus on that. And then also applying sort of sound password authentication practices, especially for privileged users, so IT administrators, anybody who can authorize payments. The other thing that actually goes hand in hand with these kind of CO scams or impersonation scams is to up the non-technical processes. So, what we spoke about earlier, when you have that deepfake attack where I leave a voice message that sounds like the CEO, and maybe my internal process was, okay, I'm not allowed to do a payment just on the request of one person's email. I need to call somebody. If we then use the deepfake threats, that's not good enough. So we may have to say, well, I actually I have to go and see somebody in person, or I need to really physically, I need to call them, I can't rely on them calling me. That's sort of like really improving the processes to avoid these kind of attacks. And applying best practices. So that's sort of from a tips for businesses. Under best practices, and I don't want to go too much on the technology side, but there is also something to be said about doing proper threat monitoring and partnering with like a service provider that can do that. They have great technology in place that monitors if something out of the ordinary is going on. So it does make sense to look at that. And then for the consumers, again, very similar actually, in a way, is to get people to think about, being aware of the risks both at home. It can affect our money, it can affect maybe the children. I don't want my kids to be groomed or, be in contact with the underworld. So really educating ourselves, and hence why we have the session, right? And I'm quite passionate about raising the awareness of people in schools, and not just the people in banks and organizations, but everybody is affected. Then it actually comes back to one major behavior change, and that's to think before you click, or to slow down. And I know we're all so busy, especially on phones, like it's like on autopilot, we don't think. But all it takes is like literally 5 seconds for the amygdala, the fear center, to slow down. And that's what the cyber criminals, what they do is they want our fear centers to take over, and then we don't think critically. So they send us stuff that makes like our heart race, the CEO wants me to do something, or geez, if I don't do this now, that's urgent. So by just sort of taking a breather before responding or reacting, that's the number one behavior. It's really, and to not trust anything and anybody. Limiting what you share about yourself online is also very important. It talks about all this, the automation of reconnaissance that the bad guys are doing. So the less you put out there about yourself, the less they can abuse to build those targeted scams. Using good passwords, and I know passwords are a pain, but they are actually really important, especially for critical accounts. And I'll share like a little trick. What I always tell everyone is use a password manager for everything else, because we have 100 passwords, so who can remember them? But for your most critical ones, that's your online banking, it's your email, it's maybe your social media as well. So those 3, maybe 4, you should remember a very long passphrase or unique password for each of them. And I'll show you now how it's actually quite easy to do that. And going back to basics, applying patches, not running pirated software, having anti-malware on your devices, etc. So those are really the top 3 tips, I guess, for consumers. And then this is the passphrase trick. So I asked Emily about, is there like a song that everybody knows? I can't sing it, probably thought of better. But you can either use the whole song as like a long passphrase, or what you could do is if you use the first letters of each, of each word with the commas, etc., and then that's your stem, and then we add a date in the middle, never at the end. Do it in the middle. That's better. And then you say, for example, this is my Instagram. This is my password for my Instagram, and then this is my password for my Facebook, and this is my password for my MCB banking. So that way you have unique long passwords for the different accounts, but you actually only remember one stem. And I've been using that trick for many years. I have like a German beer drinking song, and then I just add like the different prefix or at the end, and then a password manager for everything else, because that's it takes care of all the passwords automatically. You can sync it with your phone. It's just that I wouldn't put my online banking password in a password manager, just in case, but everything else. And then that's really it. So the key takeaways of the whole talk, I guess, is to realize that social engineering or hacking the human is the #1 threat when it comes to successful data breaches or hacking attempts. The humans are important. I know that technology is great and we should automate as much as possible, but there is that last line of defense. And often what companies are also doing is they sort of blame, the humans are the weakest link, but we can make the weakest link the strongest security assets, by educating them, by making them more aware, by changing their behavior. Yeah, and then the facts, those stats that I spoke about earlier, it shows that you can really, quite in a short time, reach a massive result by doing both sort of short kind of awareness training combined with simulations, like phishing simulations, etc. So that is, that's it. Merci beaucoup.